Hi everyone, I'm just popping on to do another video. This one is focusing on the three powerful lunations that we have for October. So I was going to make a video to talk about the Aries new moon that's opening October, that happens on October the 1st. But then I started to see, how all of these major moon phases in October, they kind of feel linked or interrelated, and they mark these sort of key or pivotal moments in a month that is full of major planetary activity. But by examining what's going on with these changes in the moon's face or shape around these times, we can kind of go deeper into what the kind of mood of the moment will be and what these lunations are symbolizing or pointing to, like some of the themes or associations that these can be connected to. And of course, this is trickling down to affect us on a personal, more intimate level, but it also has a little bit of, well, a lot of symbolism. I shouldn't understate that, for the general times for everyone on Earth or in society at the moment. So I thought I would just break that down a little bit more. Like I said, October is full of major planetary happenings. Some of them are really intensified and amplified and are occurring around these changes in the moon cycle. But for now, I'm going to talk about what's happening through the lens of these moon phases. So just that term lunation, the root word being luna or lunar, which means the moon. And typically a lunation is when the moon makes a significant change in how it's holding, reflecting the light of the sun. And the two key pivotal lunations that we focus on, of course, are the new moon, where the sun and the moon are conjunct or in roughly the same area of the sky so that the moon disappears. This is the end of a lunar cycle and the beginning of the next cycle. And the new moon always happens in a month in the same sign that the sun is in. So the opposite to that is the full moon, which represents a culmination or a peak of intensity and growth and energy. This happens when the moon and the sun are opposite each other in the sky so that the moon can receive the full light of the sun. So that's when we have a very, very bright, amplified moon. And that moon typically happens in the opposite sign of where the sun is that month. So October is remarkable. There's a lot of chatting about this right now, that we have two full moons in October, one on the first day of October and one on the last day of October on Halloween. So that doesn't always happen, and that's interesting to note. And it's kind of interesting because it invites and opens the month up with a powerful symbolic, Aries moon, and then it closes the month with a powerful and symbolic Taurus moon. And then, of course, in the middle of the month, we have the Libra moon. And remember, the new moon will be the same as the solar position at the time. So that's when the moon and the sun come together in the same location, and the moon appears dark. And like I said, that's the beginning of the lunar cycle and the end of one that has just finished. And then, of course, the full moon is the culmination or the peak. And these are related to phases that happened roughly 6 months previous, and are related to phases that will happen 6 months in the future. So when we have a new moon in Libra, that means in about 6 months we'll have a full moon in Libra when it's Aries season and the moon and the sun are in polarity, and in reverse. So if we have an Aries full moon in 6 months' time, we will have an Aries new moon, because we'll be in Aries season when the moon and the sun are together. So I just want to break these down a little bit, look at them a little bit more closely. They each have their significations and their symbolism, but then they're kind of tied, as I said, to some interesting aspects and planetary activity around that time, that it all seems intrinsically linked. So we'll start with the first one, which happens in Aries on October the 1st at 9 degrees Aries. For those of you who know your birth chart, if you have cardinal placements or cardinal angles, like your rising sign degree or your midheaven degree, etc., around 9 degrees Aries, that means this powerful Aries moon will be making either an opposition, a conjunction, or a square aspect to those angles or those prominent placements in your chart. And those are very activating aspects. They polarize and confront if it's an opposition. They consolidate and intensify if it's a conjunction, or they stimulate and catalyze and even add some kind of, edge or a bit of a combative feeling or friction, where two areas of life are kind of having a little bit of a sort of, the word is friction. There's friction going on between these two areas of focus that are 90 degrees away from each other in the square aspect. So yeah, just pay attention to that. 9 degrees Aries for anyone that has major cardinal placements. That's Aries, Libra, Capricorn, or Cancer. And anybody that has major fire placements like Sagittarius or Leo, this full moon in Aries will be trine to those. So it will be very stimulating and potent and supportive, but probably a little more flowing and beneficial. And then anybody that has major air placements, this moon is going to be in sextile to those. So it will add energy and intensity, but in a softer manner that is typically harmonious and supportive in some way. So just to pay attention to that degree. So if you have anything around that area, this moon might be felt in its potency and fiery symbolism a little bit more intimately or in a more impactful way for you. So Aries, as we know, is the sign that begins the spring season. It's cardinal fire. It's the sign of the warrior or the gladiator. It belongs to Mars. So it's a very strong, combative, individualistic sign. So when planets are in that sign, they tend to take on that zodiacal quality. So in the case of the moon, which rules over our feeling states, how we process emotion, the kind of general mood that's running in the current of the cosmic weather at the moment, it makes all of moon things very fiery, very active, and very impulsive. So it can be impatient feelings, frustrated feelings. It can also be very decisive and reactive and direct feelings, stating the feelings in a very strong, powerful way. And you might not necessarily have to be someone that has a lot of fire placements or cardinal placements that'll feel this activity in this catalyzing, prominent way. This moon has a lot of juice. It has a lot of power. So somewhere in your birth chart, you've been working on something for 6 months and you're kind of reaching a peak or a culmination of that effort, and you might be reaping the fruits or the benefits of that now. And it should be noted, like I said, Aries belongs to Mars, and Mars is also in Aries, very, very powerfully placed at home, retrograde, a little extra volatile, and Chiron is there as well, the planetoid or asteroid, depending on the astronomical definition of that, celestial body that seems to be linked to the topic of healing wounds or ongoing wounds. So I've posted a chart so you can just visualize what this looks like at the time of the full moon. We'll see that the sun is at 9 degrees and some change in Libra. And then right across where I've drawn that line, you'll see on the other side of the chart, kind of the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the moon in Aries, as we said, at 90 degrees and some change, within 2 degrees of Chiron. So it's close, but it's not right on it when it happens. But I feel that that's significant, that the asteroid of healing, individual wound, the collective wound, being near the moon, I feel like that is significant, and it's something to note. It adds a nuance or a flavor to this lunation. And with the moon is this intermediary satellite. It's very close to us. It orbits around Earth, and you know, the old world stories in astrology is that this moon, it's an intermediary, it's a nurturer, and it filters planetary energies down. And when the larger, more intense or more potent planetary energies contact the moon, it's kind of like almost like a bit of a transmitter. I think of it as like the moon draws that energy down and kind of makes it accessible or palpable or tangible to us in this like sublunar realm under the moon's nurturance. So it brings these broad planetary energies down to Earth and hones it and focuses it in a way that we can dialogue with it or feel it or contact it in a more intimate way. So that's kind of like what the moon is receiving at the moment. It's receiving some of that resonance of the themes of Chiron, and it's also receiving the full light of the sun in diplomatic Libra, which shows a lot of diplomatic efforts and attempts at balance and harmony that we're making in this season, or trying to make in this season. So it's heightened, it's intense. And then it should be noted, switching over to a chart for the next day, after the moon is full in Aries and is very close to Chiron, it keeps moving, of course. It moves very relatively quickly because it just has to orbit around the Earth. So that's a faster passage. That's why the moon can go all the way through the zodiac in 1 month or month. It's one moon cycle, roughly. So if you look at that chart over at the left, you see that the moon has moved away from Chiron. It's not perfectly opposite the sun anymore, but now it's right on top of Mars, the planet that rules over Aries. And we all know the condition of Mars now and what it's contributing to the quality of time and the general vibe. So remember what I said, that when the moon makes contact with a planet, it kind of pulls and draws that energy near and close to us so that we feel it in the sublunar realm in a more intimate and accessible way. So that moon will still be quite full of light because it's still opposite the sun, receiving all of that solar light. So it's still pretty juiced up. It's still quite intense. It's a very highly charged battery. And it's filtering in and honing and directing martial energy in a really potent way down into our world in an intimate manner. So again, pay attention to that degree. That's 24 degrees Aries at this point. So some of you with late cardinal placements, full disclosure, I have some, the last couple of years with the eclipse season, and of course, all of the heavy outer planets in Capricorn at late degrees. It's been a really intense time, a lot of change and upheaval, internal and external. So this is a quick conjunction. The moon only really hangs around in an exact place for a couple of hours, but a lot of heat can come up in a couple of hours, a lot of potency. So there might be a flare of intensity and feeling around that time, and drawing the martial full powers down into an intimate way that you might feel more personally for those of you with late cardinal placements. Then if you look over to for any of us for that matter, this is pretty strong. So if you look over to the right-ish side of the chart, you'll see I've drawn a circle around Saturn, and there's little check marks beside Pluto and Jupiter. So it shows between the perfect full moon phase, the moon made a square to Jupiter and a square to Pluto, so it brought up some of the themes that those planets in Capricorn are working and changing and transforming this year. Brought that down to a more intimate level, and then its final aspect that it's about to make after crossing over Mars and still being quite charged by Mars is a square to Saturn. So Saturn, we know, is bearing down and giving a lot of structure and limitation, some heaviness, deep sense of responsibility and a need for perseverance this year that will ultimately, I think, lead to restructuring and rebuilding of some very important things in society and in our relationships and in our lives. It's just we've got to endure it and bear it. So when the moon makes a square to Saturn, that's always a bit of a tight passage, because we feel in this tight way the feeling of emotional limitation or the need to have some emotional boundary or frustrated feelings if the emotions are really powerful and potent, as they probably will generally be with the moon on top of Mars like that. Then you have Saturn kind of bearing down and clamping down, and you can feel the friction or the tug of war, feeling like wanting to feel really like demonstrative or explosive or immediate with emotional expression, but needing to kind of contain it or constrain it, and then a bit of a tug of war between those two energies. So again, that's just like a couple of hours, and that happens later on Friday evening. All of my forecasts, if I haven't mentioned already, are in Pacific time, so that'll be a little bit different depending on where you're living, whatever time zone. But it's just interesting to note, because we just came off of this potent Aries moon, fiery culmination, peaking, and then the next day there's almost like a feeling of like an echo or a ripple effect, or a little bit of a fallout, or somewhere that all of that potency kind of goes, at least for a little while. It's just like a whole lot of energy that wants to go somewhere, but again is being constrained and frustrated by the demands of Saturn. And it is also interesting to note, like when we look at aspects, geometric relationships that the planets have with each other around the astrology chart, like around the circular chart, you know, it really depends on what sign has what's called the inferior superior position. So that's probably a whole other video to explain fully how that works, but it should be noted that in this case, Saturn in Capricorn has a little bit more advantage in zodiacal order. It's in what's called a bit of a superior position, where it has the ability to overcome Mars. And you can kind of see that if you read the chart sort of from right to left. It's like Saturn's kind of pushing down and exerting that kind of authoritative, constraining, limiting energy on Mars, which I think just makes Mars feel even more frustrated. It's like a signature of, you know, kind of a warrior spirit gone rogue in a way. It wants to lash out and crash out and find somewhere to direct all of its martial power. And then something about the current structure of authority sort of bearing down on that and attempting to have some kind of containment or control. And that has been the dynamic all year since, well, not all year, but I should just say the whole time that Mars has been in square aspect to Saturn, and that dynamic is pretty charged. And after this time, at least, that will start to soften and lessen, and we won't have a square exactly like that between Saturn and Mars until they both change signs next year, and then that's a different flavor and another video down the road probably. Anyway, so just to kind of highlight that unique configuration that's happening in the wake of that potent Aries moon, I thought I'd take a little time to break that down. So then we get to the next major potent lunation of the month, and that's mid-month on October 16th, when the moon goes dark in Libra. That's the end of a lunar cycle and the beginning of the next. It's a dark still point. It's like the death of the moon, and it's when energy tends to be a little bit more drained and constrained, and maybe we're all feeling a little bit depleted and have a need to draw back and reflect, conserve energy, and sort of think about and begin to formulate some intention for how we're going to use and direct the energy of the newly emerging next lunar cycle. And it's around this time when the moon goes dark that we go into that deep introspection and into this darkness, and we can do this thing like where it almost feels like we're going into the underworld or into the depth of our soul, and we're picking up very deeply on sort of soul deep messages or soul deep guidance that seems to arise up out of our sense of destiny as it's linked to like our body and our constitution and our sense of purpose. These are all very lunar things, but they sort of seem to kind of come up from something below, like a sense of something subterranean that we've got to go down inside of to discover and receive in a way that is very surrendering and sort of passive, like letting it come to us, emerge out of the darkness toward us, because it's the absence of light, which is associated with daytime and conscious, waking, active, goal-oriented, and outward-seeking consciousness, like where we're thinking about where we want to go. But a dark moon and darkness and nighttime is all about going in and not thinking about where we're going to, but maybe reflecting on where we've come from and letting things come up to us that we need to receive and see and accept, and come to some harmonious interphase with in the darkness, I could say. So I pulled up another chart just so you can see what's happening around that moon. So remember I said it's at 23 degrees Libra. So again, if you have any cardinal angles or major planets in your chart around 23 degrees, you may feel the potency of this new moon with more intensity, and you might feel an extra draw or drag on your energy reserves in a call to go deep into that interiority, into that quiet kind of nighttime process where you can maybe surrender and receive some insight in that passive and almost kind of meditative or reflective state. But certainly that's available for everyone. I'm just pointing that out because, again, like I said, folks that have had late cardinal degrees in their charts have been having a time the last couple of years. So knowing that it's coming, you can kind of maybe mentally, emotionally, psychically prepare yourself for it and not work against it, but maybe take advantage of what it could be really good for. So wherever Libra falls in your chart, that house that Libra is connected to, this shows where if we imagine that area of life as kind of like a garden. I mean, there's a lot of great astrologers that really got us thinking about the lunar phases with these growth or gardening or tending metaphors, like the great Dane Rudyard, of course, and Demetra George and others. It really has become embedded, I think, in our language and our lexicon and astrology of, you know, it's a very ancient practice that the moon is related to growth cycles and growth of nature and the time of right harvesting for herbs at certain phases of making medicine with the lunar cycle, so this sort of thing. So I really love it, you know, being a herbalist, and I love thinking about the moon in that way. So I invite you to kind of think about the new moon or the dark moon as a time when the ground has gone fallow, like this practice that farmers do, where they allow the soil to just be empty and there's no growth process going on there, at least that can be seen. It's a time of letting the soil sort of rest so it doesn't become devitalized or overworked. You know, if we don't allow the soil to rest, then we're constantly driving this soil to keep producing, you know, a la daytime function or solar function, expecting to always be like productive, and then you end up depleting the soil and it's diminishing returns. You get less and less back until, of course, some kind of crash happens, and then it's a bit of like a famine, so to speak, is that there's nothing left there, that the soil needs to be regenerated and healed and vitalized before it can work for us again. So it's accepting that there is that cycle in nature, and our relationship to the moon can be a lot like that. So really just, maybe doing nothing. Maybe something is happening on an interior process that's super productive on a soul surrender level, but not forcing yourself to have to do something or have the answer right now. Or, there's a lot of talk about, oh, I'm going to set my intention. Well, maybe the intention is not really clear right at the new moon. This is where we go deep into that state of figuring out what may come and what may start to emerge when the moon gains light. So, as I said, I just pulled up the chart just so we can see what's happening. So on the 16th, it's around 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. This is when that moon-sun conjunction is actually exact. So you can see on the left-hand side, circle in red, that the sun and moon are together at 23 degrees Libra and change. And then across, over on the right bottom-hand side of the chart, you'll see that Mars is there. So we know that the moon and the sun have just passed by and are separating from an actual supercharged opposition with Mars. Now, Mars is at 20 degrees and the moon and the sun are at 23, so they're moving away from that really charged polarity with Mars, but it's still in play and it's still in effect. And maybe in the days previous, there was a lot of potency and intensity around confronting the intensity of Mars and its demands and its drives and trying to hold that in balance. So I emphasize that because, again, inviting people to really take some rest on this new moon, especially if you have late cardinal placements that are major in your chart, just to know what's happening. There could have been a lot of energy expenditure contending by opposition with that potent Mars in the days preceding the new moon. So if you feel juiced out, if you feel like you need a break, if you feel like you need to do nothing, and you don't, I'm just giving you astrological permission to not feel pressured and to not have to justify anything. Take the time that you need. And we certainly need a lot of time to have space and cool down these days because there's a lot going on. And then you'll notice around the middle of that line, that axis between Aries and Libra, and then Libra over on the other side where the new moon has happened, there's a T-square with Saturn in Capricorn. So the moon and the sun are on their way to having a square showdown with that Saturn in the upcoming hours and days. So we're passing from a few days of being opposite Mars, where things are probably really high energy and intense, and maybe there were some struggles or things we're working really hard on keeping in balance. Then the new moon comes where maybe energies are kind of low, really needing to know that you'll be coming up soon up against more of that feeling of, restriction and frustration and limitation that could be quite fatiguing and maybe a bit discouraging. It really just depends on how it plays out for you exactly. But just to know that that moon is happening in between these two kind of hard things. It just had that showdown with Mars and it's heading for one with Saturn. So it's right in the middle there when it's time to, as I say, let the ground go fallow. Maybe use some of those suggestions of kind of a state of acceptance and surrender you can get into, at least for a couple of days when the moon is dark, to rest and recharge and reflect. There's an area in your life, like I was saying earlier, in your birth chart that Libra is connected to, where something new is going to be emerging in the next 6 months that will, you know, make a lot more sense when the moon is full in Aries season. And then in blue, just for a little bit of happiness and joy, if we could find, you know, something to feel excited about, is that Venus will have entered Virgo on October the 2nd. Venus is a little bit reserved and a little restrained in the gifts and protections and bounties she can give in Virgo, but what she can do in Virgo is help us to really ground and tend to self-care and to use Venusian energies of connection and cohesion in a way that's really useful and practical. It's not super splashy, but it might just be what's needed right now. And what's awesome about that is that meanwhile, you know, with Mars still in that edgy square to the big planets in Capricorn, and then the moon and sun also being in square aspect, so that charged T-square in the cardinal signs, there's a little bit of a ballast between Venus and Virgo and all of those heavy planets in Capricorn by trine aspect. So this is interesting, and this makes us think back to last month when Venus was in Leo, forming a good trine with Mars, offsetting the intensity from Leo, giving a bit of a steam valve or an outlet for the potency of Mars and some support from that position that Venus was able to provide. So now Venus is shifted into Earth, and she's able to kind of go, okay, I'm gonna, she's throwing a lifeline from the other side and trying to kind of direct and vent out the potency and the heaviness of those Capricorn planets and channel it and funnel it into something constructive and useful. And that could be really good. So we're getting a bit of a dose of positive Venusian energy in the element of Earth from the other side. That, you know, when I see when I see these squares and oppositions and all these tight spots, you know, me being me, I'm always scanning for some kind of escape route or some gem, some little piece of positivity that we can look at, so we don't become too myopic on what's really stressful. It doesn't play down the work that needs to be done, the intense things that we're probably all wrestling with, trying to keep in balance and contend with right now. But Venus is there, doing her best. She's trying to cover us as we go in to the line of fire, so to speak. And I use war metaphors because Mars in Aries, it's pretty martial. Anyway, so I just thought I would highlight that for you. Then we get to the end of the month in October at 8 degrees Taurus, we have a full moon on Halloween. Now that's pretty interesting, really auspicious, lighting up this dark Halloween night where traditionally the veil between this world and the other world is very thin, and, you know, we can contact our ancestors and have reverence for our beloved you know, family or dear ones that have passed. And it's that night that we celebrate the mysteries and the shadows of life and integrate it and allow it into our conscious and day-to-day awareness and make provision for it, so that, you know, death isn't pushed off into the corner that starts to, like, it's being denied or ignored, or we have holidays all through the various cultures to celebrate death and honor those that have passed. So it's interesting that we have a full moon that night. That's pretty, that's like a Halloween postcard, you know, this like dark starry night and then this big mysterious full moon, and maybe there's like a little witch on a broom with a cat flying over that moon, and I think it's quite poetic, and it feels kind of like auspicious because Taurus is the sign of the moon's exaltation. So in a lot of ways it's a really abundant moon because Taurus is ruled by Venus, and by this time Venus will be in her own sign in Libra, really, really strong and powerful and abundant. Unfortunately, up against a lot of hard work, again, that Venus has to do. We'll get into that a little more later. But that very powerful Venusian energy is lending itself to the sign of Taurus through rulership, and then that is, you know, really absorbing into the potency and the symbolism of this culminating Taurus moon. So somewhere in your birth chart, wherever Taurus is connected to, this is where you're reaping the benefits, and there's a peak or a crescendo of energy in that area of life, something you've been working on for the past 6 months. You're kind of reaping the benefit or the reward of that, or taking stock of what's come of those efforts, and then getting ready to recalibrate and move in a new direction if need be. So 8 degrees Taurus. So that's for our fixed friends, anyone that has early angles or planets in any of the fixed signs, and that's Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. You might feel the bounty and the abundance and the charge of this Taurus full moon with some more subjective potency and intimacy, but certainly it's powerful enough for all of us to tune into and reap the benefit of. Now, full moons are times that are opposite the new moon, where it's time to kind of go dark and go within and be reflective. Full moons are when energies are really amped up typically, and we're just feeling like, wow, it's like I'm awake all night and I've got all these like visions and these ideas, and we just feel full and humming and buzzing of energy, very much like the moon. So, you know, it's a time when we may be really tempted to like use all of that energy and kind of bust out and try to do a lot with it, which could feel really good. And this should even be noted, especially for the first full moon of the month in Aries, which is really hot and volatile. Traditionally, some care is taken around the full moon. Certainly in the yogic tradition, new moons, you don't have a yoga practice with your body like an asana practice, because your energy is really low and that's a time to rest. And then when the moon is really full, it's a time when we might overdo things because we're feeling really amped up and super energized. We might stretch a little too hard or go a little too long in the practice because it feels good in the moment, but then after there could be a little bit of body damage or overexertion with the energy. That's a personal thing for people, like depending on your body capability or needs or how you're feeling. Just know that full moon energy can really sweep you up and away, and you can get really caught up in the moment. So maybe there's like a practice or like a ritual or something that you want to craft for yourself, where you can enjoy the abundance of that full moon. So to just pay attention to that and know that, and think about those thoughts and see that if that applies to you or makes sense to you. Now, this is an auspicious full moon in that it's in Taurus, the moon's exaltation. It happens on Halloween night, illuminating the night of the thin veil between this world and the next. And Venus, the ruler of Taurus, is in Libra, so very, very charged, very powerful, bringing so much abundant Venusian energy to this moon. But it gets more interesting, and I'll pull up the chart. So this moon is opposite, at this point, the Scorpio sun. At this point, we've entered Scorpio season, the season of reflection and investigating the shadows. Scorpio also belongs to Mars. This is Mars's secret investigative X-ray vision nocturnal sign, Scorpio. And so remember I said this is how we get a full moon, is that if you look over on the right side of the chart, there's the moon circled in red under an arrow, and then on the other side is the sun, so it's the polarity. The moon is receiving the full light of the sun. The moon is also tightly conjunct with Uranus, who's currently in Taurus for the next several years, bringing a lot of disruption and potent change and the spirit of revolution or innovation, sudden surprises, all of these things that Uranus tends to bring to the quality of time. It's filtering through the earthy sign of Taurus, so it's a lot of changes that are going on with things like our food or our material resources, or even our relationship with the planet Earth, how we're treating the planet, the very earth that we stand on currently. For the most part, the bounties of the earth are being treated like these resources, and everything's been commodified. And we are now on the precipice of seeing the drastic effects of that very unsustainable relationship and the treatment of our planet. And certainly in these occult and magical and astrological traditions and spiritual traditions, we're seeing a huge return to animism, relating to the planet and relating to animals, relating to plants, relating to everything as non-human beings that have personhood. And if we have a connection to things in this manner that acknowledges that they have personhood, well, hey, maybe we can't just treat it all like resources at our disposal to do whatever the heck we want and not really think about the consequences of the impacts of our our air quality, our water, the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Remember that I said, like, tuning into the cycle of the moon tunes us back into that relationship with the growth cycle of nature, that there's a time when things need to go dark or go fallow, let things rest, let things die away and die off. We can't always be in this state of growth, abundance. And I sort of feel like Uranus is coming to kind of rock our world in that way, to show us quite literally that the way that we are relating to the earth element and the bounties of the planet Earth need to radically change, because they are not sustainable. And when I say they are not sustainable, things are becoming quite dangerous. So we know that that is part of the hard work we have ahead of us now for humanity. So it's going to take a huge paradigm shift and a change in the way that we relate to the things that we need from the earth, and coming into some right relationship and restoring that relationship to earth and all the beings that reside on earth and depend on earth. So I just feel like that Uranus conjunct that very bright and auspicious and notable moon on Halloween that's talking about, honoring the life of this world and passing into the mystery of the next. I sort of feel like we could bundle up all of those themes and kind of think about that at that time and see how the culmination of our efforts and our current relationship with life, with the planet, with the material realm, see if that's going to be up for some kind of radical reinvention or innovation in the upcoming months, and of course in the upcoming years, as long as Uranus is there. I hope that made sense and it didn't sound like too much of a crazy rant, but you'll probably get a sense of where I stand on these matters and some of the things that I believe in and I hold to be dear. So those are some of the things that are coming up for me, at least, with this full moon on Halloween. So there's another thing going on that day. If you look back over on the left side of the chart, I've circled Mercury in Libra. So at this point, Mercury has gone retrograde and has passed back out of Scorpio and back into Libra. And from this position at 26, almost 27 degrees Libra, Mercury's in a square aspect with Saturn, and we'll be backtracking through Libra, and we'll square Pluto and we'll square Jupiter. More cardinal squares. We can't seem to get away from them. But in the potency and the high energy and perhaps the revelry of that moon, and also the radicality and the sudden inspiration, and maybe even the spirit of revolution to some extent that's inspired under the potency of that full moon, is happening at a time when Mercury is retrograde. So communications are a little bit wonky, and we're being drawn back into the retrograde journey with Mercury to revisit our communications, to go back over anything that we've been communicating over the last couple of weeks preceding this full moon, to sort of redo, recheck, refine, and also reconsider if we had been charging ahead with some kind of communication or literary or informational effort. This is a time to pull back and refine it and improve it and reconsider it and see if this is the way that we want to proceed once Mercury goes direct again. So that's happening while that moon is really potent and really charged. So I think, at least for me, I got a lot of earth in my chart, so I always want to caution everybody to keep at least one little toe on the ground and stay practical and grounded and aware as you possibly can, that in the abundance and in the enthusiasm of that high lunar vibe, there is this weird edgy communication friction thing going on with Mercury retrograde in Libra, coming, backing up to crash into Saturn again, and feeling that, that authoritative, restrictive demand of Saturn kind of bearing down there. And then Mercury's going to keep going, and it's going to square Pluto, and it's going to square Jupiter. So these Capricorn themes we've been working through this year of restructuring, slow growth, being resourceful, and having to face the realities that Pluto is dredging up of the irreversible changes and transformations that we all have to surrender to and accept and work with, and to some extent all of that's kind of bubbling up around that time. So just drawing attention to that, because you can get really excited about these moons, these new moons, these full moons. It's like, whoa, it's so mystical, it's so rad, let's do something like witchy and cool, totally do it, follow your instincts and your intuition. But also know that there are layers. There's a lot going on in the cosmic weather, and there's a lot contributing to the cosmic weather that gives it's not so cut and dry, and it's not so easy. There's a lot of good and positive things that can be emphasized and reaped, but we also need to have one eye on the fact that we're still going through a pretty fraught passage. There's a lot of friction, as we know, on a diplomatic and political and social level, and then it's trickling down into our personal lives. So we need to be wary, and we need to be, wise and thoughtful and intrepid in some cases. I can hear my dog whining to go outside, so I should probably wrap this up. But, and yeah, maybe I'll pull Kingston in the video and you can meet him. He's a very cute dog. Anyway, so I just wanted to draw some attention to that and give you some thoughts. And certainly if you have other thoughts, be in touch. And I know I've alluded to a lot of potency with these squares and oppositions and trines. And if that's all sounding like a whole lot to absorb, and you want to know what does it actually mean for your own birth chart and your own life, get in touch. We can do a reading, and I can help you sort that out in a way that's relevant and specific to you. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of the 3 powerful lunations of October 2020 and some of the interesting layers that are going on around those pivotal times with the other planets and aspects. And I better get this guy out for a walk. So signing off, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.